Right now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to discuss a very interesting book by a person that we've never focused on in the decade plus we've been doing this program. I'm talking about what may be the unsung hero of television, the TV news cameraman, the person on the front lines who takes us live or soon as live anywhere in the world where something is happening, whether it's in the battleground of ISIS or Afghanistan, whether it is other countries around the world, the terrorist bombings going on in Europe, or what happened 2 weeks ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. These are the people who bring the news unfiltered to you. You're about to hear the voice of someone who was in that profession for 4 decades, among the best in the business at ABC News. His assignments went from Vietnam to 9/11. And his Vietnam tour of duty is now the subject of a remarkable book called On the Front Lines of the Television War, published recently by Casemate. It is a pleasure to have on this program, live from Hackensack, New Jersey, the author and former ABC News cameraman, Tony Hirashiki. Tony, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Thanks for invite us on your show.
It is a pleasure. And joining both of us is the editor of this remarkable book. Joining us live from Bethesda, Maryland, Terry Irving. Hi, Terry.
Hi there. How are you?
Very fine, thank you. And I got your wonderful comment on the chat room that you are old enough to have heard the famed Gil Scott-Heron and the last poet performed that the revolution will not be televised. So we appreciate you being important. Thank you so much for that. Tony, why did you decide after all this time and your tour of duty in Vietnam to say it's time for me to showcase that in book form?
This is Tony. Let me explain. Many books about Vietnam are written and published soldiers, generals, historians, print media writer, and reporter experience based their Vietnam War. But cameramen cover the TV, correspondent report TV, never have a chance to show what we done after more than 40 years. And those people, especially correspondent, was fade away. So I'd like to remind people who are there, who are they. So I start write this book, especially camera crew, correspondent who sacrificed during covering war.
For you, Tony, what was the most striking thing about day after day taking your camera through those fields and those jungles and those areas of Vietnam and night after night for the people back in the United States documenting what you saw, what you and your correspondents saw?
First thing, we tried to as close as an event is happening. And then second is make sure my correspondent always warning me, Tony, keep your head down. And this is a thing. First, we protect, make sure we don't be casualty ourselves, but as much as close to event and then report. So every assignment was quite challenging.
Terry, Ted Koppel, who was one of the people that was a correspondent for ABC News at the time in Vietnam that Tony worked with, in recommending this book, said that Tony produced a memoir of Vietnam unlike anything previously written. How?
The main thing is that Tony is Asian. And the American correspondents and the Canadian correspondents who came in to cover Vietnam, inevitably, and not intentionally or meanly, but they didn't speak the language. Tony doesn't speak the language still, but he's actually a brilliant writer. But he was friends with the cyclo drivers. He was friends with the doorman. He was friends with all of the journalists, the crews that worked. The cameraman from Singapore, the cameraman from Korea, and they were. It was a whole much more intense, much closer view. Plus, also, what Tony did is really this not just a memoir of his time. He set out to chronicle all the people, the staff, the bureau, the correspondence, the people in New York, all the systems and the people that really created television news at that time.
At that time, Tony, with the correspondence with ABC News, I believe there were people like Ted Koppel, Steve Bell, Roger Peterson. What was it like to not just cover this war, but also have the kind of rapport with those, the kind of relationship with those correspondents, so that both of you could document as best as you could what was going on in front of you?
Yeah, this is especially relationship correspondent and crew is very important. For me, as a point of view as a cameraman, I always try to understand what correspondent try to report his event. And this is the most worry about my concern. Then spend together with 2 days, 3 days in the field. We became a kind of same like a brother. Sometimes sharing food, sometimes sharing water, and beyond the job, we established kind of very good, how to say, comradeship or friendship. And,
Can I?
Yep.
Go ahead, Terry.
Can I break in? I'm only because I can talk faster. But Tony and the correspondence would almost establish a telepathic relationship where Tony was as much of a journalist, and this was filmed. They only had 400 feet in a magazine. That's 11 minutes. You had to think about every single shot, and you couldn't miss one, and you couldn't waste one. So the correspondents and the cameraman and the soundman really became very, very tight teams.
Yeah, one episode, my nickname is Tony. What Tony came from is my first correspondent was Roger Peterson. He asked me, Tony, do you have any nickname or shortened name? I said, Japanese don't have such shortened name. But he said, I cannot pronounce my name. Yasutune Hirashiki is too long, especially under fire. So finally he made my name is Tony. Maybe pick up from my end of name. Yasutune sound like a Tony. But this one helped. And during a fire, and he always said, Tony, keep your head down. Tony, don't come, withdraw, or this warning. That helped me a lot. So my correspondent, not only Roger, everybody is a kind of very strong bond. That's why I wanted to write their stories after war is over.
Can I break in again?
Mm-hmm.
One of the most heartbreaking parts of the book is that when Tony and Roger were working together, Roger was shot. He was wounded, and Tony went to pieces. I mean, his this was not just a business relationship. This was deep friendship, the kind of comradeship you see in an army unit, frontline unit.
Mm-hmm. By the way, was there at any time that feeling that at any given moment, either you would get shot, or one of your correspondents would get shot, or your sound person would get shot at any time? Was there always that, or to some extent that fear of God knows I may be next?
Yeah, and then so many journalists died, and of course, American journalists is the highest number of casualty, but we call the third country national, we call TCN. We are TCN, but including European and Asian and Japanese, and all journalists sacrificed. And American journalists is 21 killed, and Japanese is 14, and among third country national. French is 12. So when for example, my best friend was killed. His name is Terence Koo, and his friend Sam Kai-Fei. Those two died. I was witnessed. It was very shock. And then one of the reasons I'm writing this book, because dedicated to this guy and Correspondence.
What kind of relationship, Tony, did you have with the soldiers in Vietnam? And I'm not let me go beyond just the American soldiers or soldiers from other countries, but because you're Asian, did you ever feel that got you an edge in terms of, whether, God forbid, a North Vietnamese soldier would stare at you and your camera right in the face, or you saw a battle between South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese, that you could, because you had the language, because you had the background, you could maneuver yourself out of harm's way?
Yeah. And relationship with soldier is very important, because we stay 2 days, 3 days together. They share coffee, breakfast. We supposed not to ask any food or water to them. Cigarette maybe can ask sometimes, but we have to depend on ourselves. But the soldier was always nice and try to protect us. They never got order to protect the journalists, but they knew we don't have any weapons, so they always protect. They dig in a bunker. Something happened, they let us in too. So kind of a friendship or comradeship. I always have a good memory about soldiers.
Just to break in in the first chapter, Tony is out with a correspondent named Al Gale, and they come under an incredibly serious attack from the North Vietnamese, and it becomes so bad, and we have some of the footage of it, but it becomes so bad that actually Tony and the sound man and the correspondent all stop working and, do what they can to help with the wounded soldiers. Which is mainly holding their hands or talking to them or giving them cigarettes or water, because they weren't medics. But I mean, and I want to point out, Tony, who's an American now, didn't speak any more Vietnamese than he does English, probably less. He was very much always with the Americans or the South Vietnamese during the war.
The book is called, and it's a very special book, On the Front Lines of the Television War, a legendary war cameraman in Vietnam. We have that legendary war cameraman who spent 4 decades with ABC News with us right now live from Hackensack, New Jersey. That's Tony Hirashiki. And from Bethesda, Maryland, the editor of the book, Tony Irving. The book is published by Casmate Publishers. And, by the way, I want to congratulate John Ramirez of Chicago, Illinois. He was our latest Classic Trivia Question winner, and he has hopefully has received by now a copy of On the Front Lines of the Television War. And thank you to Casmate for making that possible. Anyway, Tony Tony and Terry are joining us live this half hour in a very special interview right here on Tomorrow Be Televised. Now in its second decade as the program All About the Tubes. Terry, what do you want the book to say, not just about Tony and his role in showing us all what was going on in Vietnam and other places, by the way, too, but also about, what these people do? And it just hit me, in the wake of what happened with Charlottesville, in the wake of what happened in Europe with the terrorist bombing a week or so ago in Barcelona, that more than ever, it's these people that are documenting living history for us.
Two things I want to mention, one of which is I am the editor. I managed to get myself out of this book completely. This is Tony's book. He's a brilliant writer. The point of that is best illustrated. Tony on 9/11 took one of the absolutely classic shots of the dust cloud coming down the street and people running when the second tower went down, and then he was lost. ABC was afraid he was dead, and he shows up covered in dust, and holding his tapes and saying, "I think I have some pictures." I mean, he has a picture that's probably one of the best ever. Journalists, and I was with ABC from '73, although I was never in Vietnam. As a matter of fact, never met Tony. But journalists want to tell the truth, and I think there's been a misnomer and it's just wrong to say that journalists don't want to tell the truth. They do. We even sent this book over to the Vietnam veterans, and it came back as if there was distortion. It wasn't happening in the field, and it wasn't. They were absolutely. What was the phrase, Tony? Shoot it as it was and present it. Shoot it as it is and present it as it was. No fake firing into the jungle. No, BS. They really tried to get the reality into their cameras. One of the things that I managed to do in this book, and it's the only thing I really pulled off, was the ABC has digitized individual frames from Tony's film, and you can see the beauty and the up close horror and honor and courage that the soldiers have, that he was putting into his camera, which you never see with cameramen because, well, they're too busy to take still photos.
Mm-hmm. Tony, how often do you pinch yourself and think, there but the grace of God go I, that I was able to do what I love doing for 4 decades and cover some of the most horrific events in recent modern history?
That's a very difficult question. Every war I cover, but Vietnam War is always more freedom than other war. But each time I shoot a horrible scene, I always thought I have to shoot, but sometimes I ask myself, make sure I'm too ugly.
But there are 2 points in the book. One is Hill 875, which was the most soldiers lost for any piece of ground in Vietnam, and they pulled out. It was useless. They pulled out of that a day later. And the other one was Tony's departure from Saigon, where he was unable to focus because of the tears coming down. I mean, he's not a cold and unemotional guy.
I think we get that. I'm certain we get that. And I must tell you, after reading this book, which everybody in the sound of the voice should step up and read, it really, if you ever didn't pay attention to what TV news cameramen do day to day in the line of duty, no matter where the location is, and those that are currently overseas doing what they're doing or around the country. And, of course, I might add the front line being what is going on with Hurricane Harvey right now and the hurricanes of the past two, including Hurricane Sally several years ago here in the New York metro area. This book, I think, will radically transform your thinking about the value of the television's cameramen and why these really are the unsung heroes of this medium. No matter where they're based and no matter what they're doing, they are the folks that are documenting living history each and every day. Again, the book is called On the Front Lines of the Television War, A Legendary War Cameraman on Vietnam. It is published by Casmate. Well, you can get it through Amazon, your local bookstore. Pick it up. It is tremendous reading. Tony Hirashiki, Editor Terry Irving, thank you both very much for joining us. And Terry, I really want to acknowledge you and your fellow camera people in the line of duty. Thank you for the service that you and they provide day in, day out to really inform us all about what our world is all about and how we can make it better. And I really appreciate you coming on today. And Terry, thank you again for what you did with this book and what you've done for Tony, but also for really bringing us a side of history that really ought to be paid more attention to.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for, and sorry for my English.
Absolutely. And Tony, one more thing. The best of everything in life to you and your family and friends from now on, always.
Thank you.
And your grandson.
Yeah. Is everything okay?